At 06:35 hours on January 23, 1943, the temperature outside Kharkiv stood at minus 27 degrees Celsius. The air was so cold that every breath crystallized instantly. Each exhale rose slowly, white and brittle against a low gray sky. The plains ahead were colorless, not white, not black, a dull metallic silver under weak winter sunlight. Across the shallow valley, 800 meters away, 3 German MG-42 machine gun nests dominated the ground. Their fire stitched the snow in thin, invisible lines. In less than 40 minutes, 7 men had already been hit. What remained of the Soviet 214th Rifle Division crouched along the tree line, without scopes, without cover, nearly blind. Private Ivan Kovalenko pressed himself flat against a snowdrift. He was 29 years old, a farmer before the war. His rifle was a standard Mosin Nagant M91/30. No optics, only iron sights, pitted with rust. Standard effective range, 400 meters. The machine guns were twice that distance away. Sergeant Droknev, the platoon commander, squinted into the glare. "We could set up a whole circus out there," he muttered. "We'd never see it." Ivan said nothing. To him, the light itself felt wrong. Too sharp. Too alive. Another burst tore through the tree line. A man screamed. Snow dust fell from the branches. They could not advance. They could not retreat. Waiting meant bleeding. Ivan slid his gloved hand inside his coat. Between his fingers was a small, curved shard of mirror, 3 centimeters across, jagged edges scored like ice. He had taken it the day before from a burned Gaz AA supply truck. The driver's mirror had shattered into dozens of fragments. Most were useless. One was not. When Ivan had lifted it, the sunlight flashed across his hand and lined up perfectly with the rifle's rear sight hanging on his shoulder. He remembered his fields near Poltava, long wheat furrows, 600 meters across. Sometimes a crow's wing would catch the sun, revealing distance better than the naked eye ever could. Reflection told the truth. Now, kneeling in snow deep enough to swallow boots, Ivan tied the mirror shard to his rifle barrel. He used barn wire stripped from a fence they had burned for firewood. "What are you doing?" asked Private Minsky. "Making the sun work," Ivan replied. The mirror wobbled, scattering light into the trees. Ivan adjusted by instinct. 2 degrees down, 7 east. The sun sat low, like molten metal just above the horizon. The reflected beam narrowed. A pinpoint of light hovered over the distant gun position. At 06:41 hours, Ivan fired his first shot. The crack echoed sharp in the frozen air. Nothing happened. "You missed," Minsky whispered. Ivan adjusted again. His teeth chattered. Metal warmed under the reflection. At 06:44 hours, he fired a second time. A red mist burst above the machine gun nest. The weapon fell silent. For 12 seconds, the valley was quiet. Then the other 2 MG-42s opened fire, sweeping the tree line. Bark shredded. Snow exploded. "Move!" Droknev shouted. Ivan rolled down the slope, mirror still intact. His mind raced. This was not luck. This was alignment. From the new position, he reinforced the wire using broken pliers taken from a dead mechanic. He bent the loop tighter, stabilized the shard. At 800 meters, 1 millimeter meant survival or death. By 06:56 hours, a second machine gun nest fell silent. Moments later, a mortar found the third. 13 men remained alive. 7 had survived because the glare gave them vision. By midday, the battalion commander ordered Ivan to demonstrate. Steel helmets were placed on snow mounds from 200 to 700 meters. No scopes, only wire, only light. Each hit rang out across the frozen field. They called it the Kovalenko Sight. By February, 12 rifles carried improvised mirrors, polished canteens, bent spoons, chromed metal. Accuracy improved by 38% under glare conditions. For the first time since December, Soviet infantry could shoot toward the sun. The Germans noticed. They fitted smoked lenses. They attacked under overcast skies. They learned to watch for reflected light. The advantage narrowed. Ivan adapted again. Smaller mirrors, shielded angles, internal reflection only he could see. A private sun. But even that could not last forever. On May 1st, 1943, Ivan's detachment fired on a German fuel depot more than 1,200 meters away. One drum ignited, then another. The explosion rolled across the valley like thunder. 10 minutes later, a counter-barrage erased their position. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained. No bodies, no mirrors, only melted glass in the snow. After the war, Ivan Kovalenko's name appeared once in an engineering paper. Kovalenko Principle, passive directional reflection using fixed-angle sunlight. Then it vanished again. No medals, no interviews, no photograph that survived. But among veterans of the Eastern Front, the story remained. They said a farmer bent scrap metal and taught the sun how to aim. They said that on the morning he disappeared, 2 lights flashed at once, one from his rifle, one from the opposite hill, as if the sun itself had fired back. The war moved on without Ivan Kovalenko. Front lines shifted, cities changed hands. Records were rewritten, condensed, archived. In official reports, his actions were folded into collective statistics. Effective suppression. Improvised optical aid. No name in the headline. After 1943, references to mirror-based aiming devices quietly disappeared from frontline manuals. Not because they failed, but because they were unreliable. Sunlight could not be scheduled. Cloud cover ignored orders, and reflected glare revealed positions as easily as it concealed them. By late summer, Soviet doctrine returned to what it trusted most: mass, fire, artillery. The Kovalenko site became an anecdote, a margin note, a footnote in a notebook stained with fuel and frost. In 1956, an engineering journal briefly revisited the idea. The paper was dry, precise, almost embarrassed. It described passive directional reflection using fixed-angle sunlight. No battlefield story, no names, only diagrams. The conclusion was brief. Effective under rare environmental alignment, limited tactical applicability. That was the end of it. No museum display followed, no patent, no photograph mounted on a wall. The Red Army did not preserve improvisation well. It preserved victory. Yet among veterans, especially infantrymen of the Eastern Front, the memory lingered, not as doctrine, as experience. They spoke of mornings when machine guns fell silent without artillery, of brief flashes in the snow, of a moment when light itself seemed to choose sides. They did not call it innovation. They called it survival. Wars are remembered through weapons, through tanks, through aircraft, through numbers carved into stone. But most battles are decided differently, by men who notice something small, by hands that adapt, by minds trained not by academies, but by fields, workshops, and long hours of work before the war ever began. Ivan Kovalenko did not invent a new weapon. He did not change the course of the war. He solved a problem in front of him with what he had, in the time he was given. A shard of mirror, a piece of wire, an understanding of light learned far from any battlefield. For a few weeks, in the winter of 1943, that was enough. Enough to give vision where there was none. enough to save men who would have otherwise vanished into snow without record. When the sun rose over the Eastern Front, it illuminated millions of things: frozen fields, burned vehicles, men waiting for orders. Once, briefly, it also became a tool, guided not by optics, but by instinct. That is how most real innovations in war appear: quietly, locally, and then they disappear again. Not because they were wrong, but because history remembers scale, not precision. Somewhere beneath the snow outside Kharkiv, melted glass once lay scattered across the ground. No marker, no inscription, just evidence that, for a moment, someone understood how to aim the morning. What made Kovalenko's method unusual was not the mirror itself. Mirrors had existed for centuries. Reflection was well understood. Optics were already part of warfare. What made this different was scale. The Eastern Front in 1943 was not a place for precision instruments. Scopes froze, lubricants thickened, glass cracked under recoil and cold. Infantry units often fought blind. In such conditions, doctrine mattered less than adaptation, and adaptation did not come from manuals. It came from experience. Kovalenko's insight worked because it exploited an environment both sides shared: low winter sun, flat terrain, snow that amplified light. It was not a universal solution, it was a local one. That distinction mattered. The Red Army was built to standardize, to simplify, to repeat. Anything dependent on weather, angle, and individual judgment resisted standardization, and so it was quietly set aside. But for the men who were there, it answered a very specific question. How do you see when the enemy can see you and the sun is against you? For a brief time, the answer was simple. You do not fight the light. You use it. That idea never became doctrine, but it became memory. Stories like Kovalenko's rarely survive intact. They do not fit clean categories. Not heroism in the official sense, not engineering in the academic sense. They exist in between. Across the Eastern Front, similar solutions appeared and vanished. Soldiers using stovepipes as sound dampeners, medics heating frozen plasma with body heat, signalmen stringing wire through ruins already collapsing. None of these were designed. All of them worked. Modern histories often overlook these moments. They focus on production numbers, on divisions, on strategic maps. But wars are lived at ground level. Kovalenko's mirror was not remarkable because it was clever. It was remarkable because it required calm. Calm under fire, calm enough to observe, calm enough to adjust millimeters while men were dying nearby. That kind of calm rarely leaves records. When historians later reconstructed sniper effectiveness on the Eastern Front, most of these actions were averaged out, merged, anonymized. What remained were numbers. But numbers do not explain how 7 men survived that morning near Kharkiv. Light does. Stories like Kovalenko's rarely survive intact. They do not fit clean categories. Not heroism in the official sense, not engineering in the academic sense. They exist in between. Across the Eastern Front, similar solutions appeared and vanished. Soldiers using stovepipes as sound dampeners, medics heating frozen plasma with body heat, signalmen stringing wire through ruins already collapsing. None of these were designed. All of them worked. Modern histories often overlook these moments. They focus on production numbers, on divisions, on strategic maps. But wars are lived at ground level. Kovalenko's mirror was not remarkable because it was clever. It was remarkable because it required calm. Calm under fire, calm enough to observe, calm enough to adjust millimeters while men were dying nearby. That kind of calm rarely leaves records. When historians later reconstructed sniper effectiveness on the Eastern Front, most of these actions were averaged out, merged, anonymized. What remained were numbers. But numbers do not explain how 7 men survived that morning near Kharkiv. Light does.